Hello humans, welcome back to Code with Connor and the Let's Learn Python course. We are here in unit number 3. If you've made it this far, you're already better than like 90% of the people who start any kind of tutorial or course and never get very far. So we're getting into real stuff now. Hopefully the project went okay. Share with me what you did. I'd love to see it. For this unit, we're going to be focusing on functions. And functions or methods, if you're in another programming language, these are like core structures that will kind of make up how you do things and how you structure larger code bases. It's by splitting up code into these things called functions. So this is like really essential control flow, structure stuff. We're going to break it into pieces so it's not too overwhelming. This whole lesson is just going to be about functions that have no parameters and no return values. So just a really simple go do something function. We'll break down the syntax, all that fun stuff. And then with the lessons in Unit 3, we'll progressively add more complexity to how those functions work in larger programs. All right, let's jump right into it. So here I am in my program, and we're going to be looking at functions. Now, functions are blocks of code that we can call on to run the code within the block whenever we want to. So sometimes we can write functions that we're going to use continuously, or sometimes there's functions that we might call on once in a while in given circumstances. What's important is that something that we want to be reusable, something that we might want to call up, again and again, is going to be stored inside of a function. One of the examples I always give people is whenever you're working with any user interface, so on a computer, on a phone, whatever, when you press on a button, the act of pressing that button is an event and it triggers an event in your code. But then what happens when that button is pressed is going to be in a function. It's going to call a function, a block of code that's meant to respond to that particular button. Right, so if you have a like button on a YouTube video and you press that like button, then it's going to call a function once that event is handled by the code, and that function is going to iterate the like count for that particular video. Try it. Just click the like button. If you do it with subscribe, it's the same thing. You click that subscribe button, and in the background, that event is being triggered that you've clicked on that region of the screen on that button, and then that is calling a function, and that function is going to have particular behaviors like incrementing subscriber counts and all that kind of stuff, and also impacting your list of things that you subscribe to. So there's great things going on there, but it's all function based. Okay, so let's look at the syntax of how we actually write these functions. So I'm going to do it like this, and we're going to start with this one here. It's called do stuff, and let's talk briefly about the syntax. So it's def, lowercase def, means defining a function. Space, and then the name of the function. Common practice in Python, all lowercase, underscores to separate words. If you're in other languages, sometimes it's camel case, so start lower, go upper. Don't use underscores. Can't put spaces in the name, and you can't start them with a number. So there's a couple of rules there that are firm. Double parentheses to indicate that it is a function, and we'll talk more about those in the next lesson. And then we start the block of code with a colon, same way we did if statements and while loops. And then notice the indent. Okay, so we've indented the block. Inside of this, I have a print statement that says, I did stuff. Okay, this was a function. It's called do stuff. I have another function called do more stuff. And it prints, I did more stuff. Okay, these are functions. And what's really important to understand is how a program gets executed. So when we run this code, imagine it's starting here and reading down the file, okay? When it reaches this function, it's going to define it, and it's going to essentially be like, okay, I know that there's a function called do stuff. I'm just going to set that aside, and I'm not going to touch this. I'm going to go to the next one. Oh, there's a function called do more stuff. We'll just tuck that away for later, okay? And this is actually the first line of code that runs for something to actually happen in our code. Those functions are there. They're in the background now. The code knows that they exist, but they haven't been called upon yet. So then I print, let's call our function. And then this is me actually calling the do stuff function. Notice the difference. Here I defined the do stuff function with the def, the colon, the indented block of code. Here I'm just calling on it. Now this is not new. We've been calling on functions all along. We called on the range function. We've been calling on random functions. So we've been calling functions, turtle functions, like forward and left and all that stuff. So this is us calling one of our own functions. Then I did a print statement, and then I called another function. So from a code execution standpoint, I want to think about this. The first line that's going to run is this one right here. When it gets to this line, the code is going to jump to here, and it's going to print that statement. When this ends, there's nothing else indented. It knows the function is done, so it jumps back down here and then goes to the next line of code, and we'll print that. And then do more stuff, shoots it back up here where it prints that, and then it ends, comes down here, and notices there's nothing else, ends the file, and that's what runs. So we should see, let's call our function, I did stuff. Let's call another function, I did more stuff, in that order. Let's run it and see. So I run it. Let's call our function, I did stuff. Let's call another function, I did more stuff. So we're seeing the order that we thought we would. What if I tried to call my function before I defined it? It's a common mistake to do it this way. If I try to run this, I get an error. Okay, I get an error that do stuff is not defined because I'm trying to use it just like I would use a variable before I've actually told Python or told my code what that variable represents. So I've tried to call a function that the code is not traced and set aside yet. It hasn't been defined. So we have to make sure in our code structure, any functions we want to use have been defined before we actually call upon them to be used. Now, one common practice in Python in particular is set up any variables we might need for the file at the top, then define every function we're going to use, and then at the very bottom, actually start the execution chain so that it will have defined all of the functions while it read through the file, and then after defining all the functions, it will then start executing the code. So this is how we create a function, and these functions can have multiple things in them. Okay, they can actually have everything in them. That block of code in the function could have an entire program that we've already written, right? It could have an entire quadratic equation solver in there, or an entire factorial solver in there, or printing a sequence of numbers. So all of that can be within a function. Just make sure it's indented so it's inside that block. And then all we have to do to run that code is just call that function by name, and it will begin executing everything that's in that function. So this is where we start to see that user menu that we did before start to gain a little bit more force, because a user choice can then call a function which can do a whole bunch of stuff. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Functions are so critical to how we structure programs, especially when we want to take on something more ambitious, something bigger. When we start planning how it's going to work, we have to start planning all the different functions that we're going to need to write in order to actually get it to work. And then we kind of get them working one function at a time until eventually we have all the pieces together to build our program. So now we're going to look at the challenge for Unit 3 topic number 1. So for this challenge, we're going to make a turtle program. So we've already done that. And we're going to use functions to draw a nice big square. I'm going to show you a little bit of my code here, but you'll notice that I've collapsed or hidden my functions from you. So you can't actually see the code that's inside the functions. So I'm importing my turtle, setting on my screen, setting on my turtle. And I've created two functions. One's called setUpTurtle and one's called drawSquare. And then my code is just call the setUpTurtle, call the drawSquare, and then exit on click. So I've created this function notation where my square drawing is now locked into a function, setting up my turtle so it's in a good position, has a good pen size, has a color, whatever. All that code is chucked in setUpTurtle so that I can do that all in kind of one shot using these functions. Let's look at how it looks when it executes. When I run it, you'll see my turtle repositions itself to the corner and then draws this nice big square, and then that's the end of it. And if I click, it's gone. So that's it for the challenge, is to create that program using functions this time, just to kind of block up our code in maybe a bit better execution style. All right, and getting into those habits of using functions for these repeatable code blocks wherever we can, because that's going to be super important as we move forward. That's it for Unit 3 topic number 1. Come back in the next video and we're going to look at Unit 3 topic number 2. We're going to add an extra layer to our functions. Good luck. You're doing awesome. You are a great human, I assume. I don't actually know, but I'm going to assume that you are. Like, share, subscribe. I love it. Hit me up in the comments if you have questions. Keep at it, and we'll see you soon. Bye, humans.